Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. Jeremy Werner bringing on Mike LaTulip because we got a lot to talk about basketball-wise. A big week ahead with Will Riley making his decision. Coleman Hawkins has a new home. Terrence Shannon acquitted of the charges. And then we got the NBA draft all within these couple of weeks here. So, Mike, we got plenty to talk about. How you been, man?
I've been good. We're not short on content. That's for sure. This is honestly like one of my favorite times of the year. Right? College basketball rosters are, for the most part, set. I say for the most part. Then you have the NBA, you have the NBA draft, summer leagues coming up after that. Like it's just, and then all of a sudden it's like football's here. So, it never ends. I love it, man. I love this time of the year.
I'm glad you brought this up. This is a random topic to start on, but Summer League. I'm excited to watch Marcus Damask in Summer League.
Yeah, we'll see where he ends up. I mean, I think he'll have a chance. I mean, a lot of those guys that we'll see if he comes in as just like a true free agent to Summer League roster. We'll see if he ends up signing an Exhibit 10 deal, which is, hey, we sign you, you're a part of our training camp, and then when we waive you, you're automatically in our G League system. So I think there's a lot of different outcomes potentially for Marcus, but I think he definitely did a heck of a job putting himself in a position to have those type of opportunities based off of this year. Still crazy that he didn't get either combine invite. I have a particular gripe with that. I have nothing. I honestly don't even know who Marcus Damask's agent is, but man,
especially the year he had. I mean, he's a definite pro player. What would be his path? Is it the Malcolm Hill path to the NBA for him, or what's it look like for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be hard for Marcus, right? Because there are definitely limitations there, I think, athletically. He was definitely able to dominate and like really dominate the college game this year. But he's a guy that, in my opinion, like if it doesn't work out in the NBA, he can make millions of dollars overseas without question. Because the thing with Malcolm, like Malcolm got his shot because he was like gaudy numbers in the G League. And like Marcus would have to get that type of opportunity somewhere to be able to do that. So that remains to be seen. But I think based off of last year, I don't think you can put anything past that guy.
No. One guy who will not be in the Summer League is Coleman Hawkins. He's coming back to school for another year. He's going to Louisville. Then he was going here, but he ends up at Kansas State for the reported $2 million NIL deal. I think we both agree. Good for you, Coleman Hawkins. What do you make of that fit and just the process that led Coleman here?
Yeah, it's a new era, right? Like to have a guy that has a fifth year of eligibility and what he did for Illinois to move on to another school, and everybody kind of all parties are like, yeah, man, sounds good. Like that goes to show you that he certainly did a lot in his time here. Now, the recruiting process is always interesting in June because I think as much as there's like the leverage component to it, you still have a lot of teams that are on the court, right? And that have kind of started the gears, like moving the gears here with their actual current team. So most people will probably look at this and be like, man, if you're in the portal, like you definitely got to wait until June. And Coleman's a unique case, right? I think his versatility allowed him to be able to kind of sneak into a few different places. And I think with Kansas State, look, their front court, when you look at like Onyenso and Akor from Samford, like it's not necessarily like a wide open front court, but it's Coleman Hawkins, right? Like we've seen this where you can move him around and play him in different spots. So if you're Jerome Tang, you're like, all right, well, can we play him at some three? Because I think it sounded like that was throughout the recruiting process was something that he was, looking to do. And I think he'll slide more to a natural spot defensively. I think we've talked about this a bunch that his, what he did defensively at Illinois, he was always better guarding fours. He just was. And honestly, guarding on the wing than he was in the post. And he'll be able to guard probably more on the wing and guard more fours at Kansas State. So it gives them lineup flexibility and just optionality with the way that they deploy those lineups. But what's really interesting is like, from what I had heard is like Jerome Tang went and was like, hey, donors, we need to up our NIL. and they ponied up, and that's, if they go far, great, and it's justified. But I think now in college basketball, like if you do that and you don't deliver, like that seat could get hot for Jerome Tang. And with Coleman Hawkins too, it's like you've spent 4 years in college basketball, you've gone to 4 NCAA tournaments. Like this last year of college basketball, I think that's a tournament team, or at least it should be, but there are a lot of things that remain to be seen with just the makeup of it.
It's just an amazing situation, Mike, where he's got this 5th year of eligibility because of the pandemic. There's really no rules when it comes to NIL. And he's just one of those in-between players that actually is worth 2 to 4 times more to a college team than he is to an NBA team. It's just a fascinating time. And as we've talked about throughout the last like several months, it keeps coming up. But how you spend your NIL, how much can you make? But then how do you spend it is going to be fascinating because, you know, Illinois chose not to wait for Coleman. I understand that because he very well could have gone to the NBA draft, but they probably got 3 or 4 players for what Coleman got by himself. So that to me makes more sense when even as good as Coleman Hawkins is, as more proven he is than the players they're bringing in. That's going to be fascinating to watch. All of these schools that spend a lot of money, including Illinois, how they spent that money.
And it's interesting too when those numbers get publicized, right? Because I don't know. I mean, I know what a lot of those other guys at Kansas State came to Kansas State for, and like what that number was. I mean, you think about like Doug McDaniel. I mean, Coleman's almost 3 times what he got, and like, I don't know, when you're talking to Kansas State, are they like, hey, here's like the top end for us? And then all of a sudden, right at the end, when you've already started workouts, here's a guy coming in for $2 million. It's things that I know, like when I was in a locker room, like we didn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think most guys, since they're getting paid more than probably they could have ever imagined in college basketball, that, you know, they're probably not sweating that too much. But yeah, I mean, think about like between Coleman and Osibor, right, from Washington, who was another guy that was publicized at $2 million. Like, you know, that's a guy in Coleman who was, at least on one team, was 3rd team this year, all Big Ten. Osibor, like, to me, that remains to be seen. Like, I wouldn't even pencil him in as like certainly not a 1st team all Big Ten guy, maybe a second all Big Ten guy, like second league all Big Ten guy. Like, I don't know, like it's the number figures for like the type of players. And Coleman, I think, because he was a part of a winning program and because he has that versatility, I think that's why that number is attached to it. But some of the ones that float around throughout college basketball is just kind of like,
yeah,
you know, teams have the money and they're certainly spending it.
Definitely learning how much they're worth to these coaches and to these basketball programs. All right, Will Riley is announcing a decision on Sunday, June 23rd here coming up, Mike. We've talked all about this, but we could be days away from Illinois adding a 5-star prospect. Now, he's an 18-year-old, right? Likely reclassifying to the class of 2024. We expect that to happen. Sounds like Illinois is the leader here. But what would your expectations be for Will Riley as a freshman on a team that's pretty loaded in talent on the wing?
Yeah, I think the last time we talked about Will, I'd watched a few games, but I hadn't watched the Durant game yet, the Team Durant game. I haven't seen something like that in a long time, man. Like how high level of a scoring barrage that was, and just all the different ways that he did it off balance. Like the one thing with Will,
yeah, just tell people 42-point game, right? In the AU circuit last month.
Yeah, 15 for 19 or whatever it ended up being. And what was really cool about watching it was you had Brad Underwood and Orlando Antigua on the baseline, right? And like there were times where you could see, like once he started, I think he had like an 11 or 13-point spurt in the first half. Like once he got on that roll, it was kind of like those two guys were like kind of looking at each other.
That's
Chester
different.
Frazier was on the other baseline, right? So like, and Will has either a 3 in the second half, like a really highly contested 3, or a finish where you could see like Chester kind of like keels over in his seat, just like, oh my goodness, like it is that high level. And I think just expectation wise, right, if he does end up coming to Illinois, I've seen a lot of stuff kind of floating around Twitter /X. Will Riley's coming to Illinois to start. I just want to make that clear. Right. This dude isn't coming to Illinois and being like, yeah, cool. I'll be like a seventh guy and rotate in. Like, this is a guy that as a 5-star, and I know we've seen this before with Sky, right? But as a 5-star, like at that size, at 6'8", 6'9", like, and there is kind of some availability there at that wing spot. Now, I do think Trey White is going completely under the radar here, and I think will probably end up being one of Illinois' best players. But that's my expectation for him, is that he's a guy that will come in, I think probably should start from day one, and honestly has like an all Big Ten upside. Like completely. And certainly like freshman of the year. I mean, all that stuff's on the table. Now you got some really good freshmen coming into the conference with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper and, a number of other guys across the conference. But all of that, I think, is on the table for him. Like he's truly like, he's that good.
What is his, I mean, every freshman needs that strength, right? For the most part, like Merez still needs that strength, even though he's really, really strong. What is the acclimation for a freshman, even as talented? I mean, you probably saw a lot of these guys at Ohio State when you were playing, Mike, that just came in and were superstars right away. But what is the acclimation process for a freshman to a Big Ten that still, with some of these COVID years, is an older league?
Yeah, I mean, it's more physical. It just is. I mean, it's more physical than high school. And he's going to have to find a way to manage that. Like there's just like for a lot of freshmen, I saw it with Malcolm. Right, Malcolm ended up being the 3rd all-time leading scorer at Illinois, and when he came in, and people know I love Malcolm to death, man. His freshman year was rough. Like practice was rough.
Will Riley's older than Malcolm was when he got
way older.
Yeah.
I mean, Malcolm was 17 in our workouts during the summer, and getting bodied and getting knocked off his spots. The skill and the talent was always there. Now Malcolm had struggled, I think, like believing in himself a little bit, which was maybe hard for people to hear and like understand, but that was just kind of who he was when he first came in, and then he captured that. But with Will's interesting in the sense where like he's such a gifted scorer, and certain guys with his frame, like he's a little bit thin. Certain guys with his frame and with his scoring ability, I'm not going to bring this back to like when I coached TBT. But what it reminds me a lot of, and this guy was a top 10 all-time scorer in college basketball. I'm not comparing their games, but the way that they can get shots off. Mike Daum was a very thin guy. And so what happens is like when you get bodied, for a lot of people, that's like knocking me off my spot and off like where I feel most balanced. But when you have guys that are comfortable making and taking uncomfortable shots, then when you get bodied, man, you just like push me right into a fadeaway. You just push me right into like a sidestep. Like I watch him and like that is how he plays. And for guys that can score like that and take the physicality element out of it, now it's game on. And I think that's what Will possesses. Now he's going to have to get through that, I think, in the first few weeks of being here. But also like as the season starts, right? Like there's just going to be, when your mind's racing and all that, but like the top end of what Will can be as a freshman, again, is like an all Big Ten type of player, which we just don't see that often in this league from guys that are that young. Man,
and then Jasper Johnson, a 5-star in 2025, is taking an official visit to Illinois this month. I keep bringing it up, Mike, but it just, every one of these little things is just like they are recruiting like a powerhouse now. Like they're getting into the battles with the powerhouses. And one of the things that happens with those powerhouses is there is a huge competition for playing time. But like that, to me, I'm not scared of that. Like I think Illinois fans have always wanted to be a powerhouse program. These are the problems, is that Kerry Booth, Trey White, like I think Trey White's going to play a big role, but all these guys have to like compete for their role. And Will Riley will too, because of all the other talent that they have. So I see that as a good thing for the program. Yeah.
And look, I think when you have carryover with guys from year to year, like there's just this affinity that you have for each guy. Like I think there's a lot of fans that like have an affinity for Ty Rodgers, and as they should, right? He embodies everything that I think that program should be about, where you're sticking it out, You're going into your third year now. You haven't transferred despite like getting shelved late in games and, all the talk about his deficiencies as an outside shooter and all that. Like, hey, there's guys that are in Ty's position that would be like, I'm gonna go reinvent myself somewhere else. Like, they don't think I can shoot, I'm gonna go shoot somewhere. Like that guy, there's guys that are like that. But if there is a scenario where Will Riley comes in and, let's say the starting lineup ends up being, and I'm trying to list this out because it's tough, right? Like someone isn't going to start. You got KJ, right? You got Boswell, you got Trey White. Like Trey White is going to start, in my opinion. You got Will Riley, and then you got Tomislav. But I didn't even mention Ben Rickhouse. There's going to be someone. If Will Riley comes here, there's going to be someone. And I didn't mention Ty Rodgers either, because I think Ty Rodgers is just as impactful off the bench as he is as a starter. And the reason why you can even do that and have it not be an issue is because of the type of teammate and the type of person that Ty is, right? Like the people that I think are like, oh no, I would be upset if I was Ty Rodgers and I'm in year 3 and I'm not starting or whatever. It's like, you would if you were in that position. You're not Ty Rodgers. And there's a reason why they value him the way they value him. So,
well, and even in my mind, man, you mentioned Ben Rickhouse as a potential guy off the bench. Like, I have it in my head that him and Kyle and Boswell are the guys, but what if Trey White is better than Ben Rickhouse? And that's not crazy, because Trey White has started 55 games at the high major level, was
top
a
30 recruit.
40 recruit. Like, even for me, like, yeah, Ben Rickhouse could be the 20-minute game guy, right? Like, that's a pretty loaded roster if that is the case too.
It's a good problem to have, right? Like now you start to see the fruits of like, damn, it was pretty important getting Orlando Antigua back, wasn't it? Like there's been a few different scenarios. I think that's,
and even with NIL, connections still matter.
Yep,
talent getters still matter.
Plenty of guys. There are plenty of guys on this Illinois roster right now that could have easily made more money elsewhere. No question. Like I know that for a fact. But the point still remains that for a lot of these guys, and this is just like a broader point, and I'll land the plane here on just the transfer portal in general, is like, there's plenty of guys. I know it was Tim Anderson mentioned about Sky Clark, like, hey, biggest mistake I made was leaving Illinois. Like Sky Clark isn't the only one that feels that way. I'm not talking about Illinois in general. I'm talking about the transfer portal as a whole. It's like there's plenty of guys that because they left and maybe their decision was money motivated, they didn't go to the right basketball fit for them. And then when it's not a good basketball fit for you, you have to leave again. Mm-hmm. So that's why this cycle keeps repeating itself, is because when guys are making moves dependent on money, it's the same thing in the workforce, right? Like I'm going to leave this job that's perfectly fine, that accentuates my abilities as a salesman or as a recruiter, whatever it may be, because this job, they're going to offer me more money. And then you go to that job and it's like, well, I have less responsibilities now. I am making more money with less responsibilities, but if I want to continue to grow in my career, I need to take more of those responsibilities on. And maybe that happened at this other company. So like, that's what we're seeing now, at least in my opinion, in college basketball. That's why it keeps repeating itself. It's like, eventually the market's going to correct with NIL, but Illinois has done a great job, I think, of like, hey, here's our budget. And here are the guys we can bring in that we think are absolute value adds, and value adds because the reality is like there's a dollar amount that's attached to these players now.
Yep. And
this guy for $800,000 may not be as much value as these 3 guys for, 150, 350, and 400. Like there's all those things I think factor in beyond just like, hey, I mean, I thought this last year, the really, really good teams in college basketball, right? There were numbers that were floated around, right? Numbers that are publicized. Do you know what any of those guys on UConn made?
No.
I have no idea, literally. And like you could dig like back channel stuff. No idea, right? All the really, really good teams in college basketball, right? Like Purdue, like there were obviously like numbers for Edey, but like Braden Smith, all those guys, you don't know. Like you don't know, because those programs, I throw Illinois in the same boat, because even the numbers that were thrown around for Marcus Damask, I'm telling you right now, we're not close.
We're not right. Like, and even some of the numbers that like we hear because we're closer to the program, like still don't know exactly every little number. But yeah, I said this with Piper on the podcast earlier in the week, Mike, like Trey White could end up being the return on investment for him could be immense. Like, so that's important. But all those guys are going to be like Will Riley, if he commits to Illinois on Sunday, he will be here, I believe, later this month. Gasparis will be here very shortly. Tomislav Visic, Piper said it will be here maybe early July. So all these guys getting together, but workouts have started. So as you, a guy who's been through these workouts, what do these mean right now? What is the value and how much is gained in these summer workouts that started this past week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you gain is just cohesion, right? And playing together, which is super important, right? They're not going to have a foreign trip this year, which I think was really pivotal last year. But what they will have is one-on-one workouts, right? When I say one-on-one, I'm talking about a position coach and a player. Maybe it's small groups where you have 2 to 3 players, and then you're just getting up and down, right? You're playing open gym. I don't know what the rules are this year, if coaches can watch that or not. I know when I played that you couldn't watch runs. Now there'd be some coaches standing up at the top of oven, passing by, but it's important because you have a plan coming into the off season, right? We want to use this guy in this situation. We want to use Ben Hummerkaus in back down situations. And then you kind of get into playing and getting up and down and seeing these guys together. And you're like, actually, maybe it's not Ben we want to use as much in back downs. It's actually Trey White. Like, man, we're really impressed with the way he facilitates. Maybe he's a guy that we would use a little bit more. So that's what the summer is for, right? Getting acclimated and then starting to piece together, hey, here was our plan in the offseason when we formulated this roster. Now we have the actual product and we're seeing it come together. What adjustments do we make? Like that's what's, I think, super critical in this summer period.
And I think Illinois could charge admission to watch these battles, Mike. I mean, you think about the 5-on-5 battle you could put together where you could realistically like put the second team in your head of whatever that wants to be, like Ty Rodgers, Ben Hummerkaus, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, Merez Johnson, right? Like that team could give the first team a run for its money. Like the competition level is going to be high and the competition for playing time, right? Like outside of, I mean, you mentioned Hummerkaus, it's kind of messing with my head now, but like outside of Boswell, I don't know if there's like for sure, like this is a 30-minute a game guy.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, honestly, maybe Trey White ends up being that guy, right? Yeah. Positional size, if he starts shooting the ball, I think what he's more capable of shooting it, if he limits more like the off the dribble stuff, that could be your 30-minute a game guy there. But look, like if they do, I don't know, I feel like it's still going to be 8 or 9 guys. Right. And then like we haven't even, I don't even think we've mentioned Merez, who just has a lot of value with the way that he plays and his motor. And he just, he eats glass. Like he's an incredible rebounder. And I think the most important thing for Merez and similar to Amani in that sense was like Amani knew who he was. And I think that helped him I think Merez is a better player than Amani, but like Amani kind of knowing and being secure in who he is, like I think got him onto the court sooner. And I think the same could be the case for Merez. But yeah, no, I think Boswell is going to be in that like 25 to 30-minute range. Like there's going to be a lot of like, I think 22 to 28 minute a game guys. And then you just, that will go up or down depending on matchups and who's got it going that night. I mean, it's a good luxury to have. Is
there any challenge of that as a player? I mean, that would be a good thing, right? Like that you're fresher throughout a game, throughout a season than putting 30 minutes a game on Domas, Shannon, and Hawkins every night. Like, is there a difficulty in that as a player at all of, hey, Kerry Booth, you might play 5 minutes this night. You might play 15 minutes this night.
It's why character comes into play, right? It's why character comes into play when you recruit. And it's why character comes into play when you like put this whole thing together, because if you map out to Kerry Booth and if your pitch to him is, hey, you were with Shrewsbury at Notre Dame and you're going to come here and you're going to start, man. You're going to play 30 minutes a game. And now if that doesn't happen, it's not that, minutes just didn't shake out his way. Like that's being untruthful in the recruiting process. Yep. And I think what's lost on most coaching staffs is, they'll do anything they can to get guys on campus. But if the plan is the plan and you're sticking to that as a coach, you'll see that the player has much less of an issue with it, right? Like if your pitch to Kerry Booth is more long term, it's like, hey, here's the 2 to 3 year plan, right? We see you fitting in these different areas this year, being like a 10 to 15 minute a game guy. And then when these guys move on, like you've excelled and you can grow into a 25 minute a game guy. Like if that was the pitch to Kerry, now you can go and do that this year. And if the playing time isn't really what he expected, you at least level set those expectations. So that all that is still true in recruiting. Because whether or not you brought a guy here for a certain dollar amount or you brought a guy here for a certain amount of playing time, like you still have to make sure that if things go south for them, if they don't progress the way you thought they were and you have to shelf them or you have to not play them or they get DNPs, that it's not going to completely cannibalize your locker room. And I think that's really what they've done. I mean, for the most part, right, everyone that you hear about that they've brought in and everyone that I've talked to, where it's like, hey, Ben Humrickhouse, I go talk to Missouri Valley coaches. You could talk to some people in the ACC that I know with Kerry, and it's like, really good kids, like about the right things. And that I think was from this past year that they really are like, hey, we had a lot of success. We went to an Elite Eight, but damn it, it was really fun coaching these guys. These guys bought in. They were for each other. I think back to that Terrence Shannon post-game interview with Robbie Hummel after the Missouri game where everybody's standing around. Ty Rogers has got his arm around Terrence Shannon, and Robbie Hummel goes and lists like, hey, what is it about this team where some guys have it going different nights? And Terrence was like, yeah, Quincy could have it going, and Marcus could have it going, and Coleman could have it going. He named all these guys, and he didn't name the guy that's hanging on his shoulder, Ty Rogers, and Ty Rogers still there nodding his head. Like, yeah. Like he wasn't like, oh man, he didn't mention me. Like, and that's the type of guys you have, man. And that's what helps you as you try to figure out these minutes is like, you don't want to have that trepidation as a coach, like, oh, this guy's going to be like a complete, zero in practice, zero in the locker room if we don't play him. Like, I don't think they have that fear with this group.
All right, Mike, you brought up his name, Terrence Shannon Jr., acquitted of the charges, not guilty in his trial. Obviously, that's huge for his NBA draft stock. It's huge for him as a person, him and his family, with everything they have gone through. And you and I are not legal experts or law enforcement experts, but just watching him go through this, I couldn't help but be impressed. I think we've talked about this a lot, of how he handled all this. And then for him to take the stand like he did, I thought was a statement for him that he wanted to go up there. He did not shy away from it. It felt like to me he was interviewing with NBA teams while he was doing that, and really saying, I did not do this. I thought that was a really powerful thing for him to do. But just any thoughts on all of that, Terrence Shannon getting acquitted here?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it did happen, right, like when the charges were brought down or when the ESPN article came out, I was on the call the next day for the game. So it was just a weird situation, right? And you heard different things that were coming out. And but fast forward to the trial itself, it's like the sense of relief that I think everybody had and like almost like a celebratory nature was not the fact he was not guilty. I think everybody, or at least this is my opinion, right? Like I was so happy with that verdict, not because it's like, whew, he wasn't guilty of what they said he did. That's a given, right? I think everybody that was somewhat close to that case knew that this, once it got to trial, it was pretty open and shut. Yeah. But my sense of relief was like, man, this kid can move on with his life now and move on, in a period that's really arguably the most important period of his life to this point. So I just, when that verdict was reached, there was like a thankfulness that came over me of just thankful that he gets to move on. Thankful, obviously the verdict was what it was, but thankful we got to freaking watch him, man. Like you're talking about if he's not guilty, if it ends up being the way it was, not guilty, and he was suspended the rest of that season. I mean, you're talking about getting robbed of, and this is me bringing the basketball part into it after talking about, as a person being able to move on, all those things. You're talking about being robbed of what is probably one of the best March runs in definitely one of the best seasons, right, of an Illinois basketball player, but certainly one of the best March runs of any Illinois basketball player in history. And to do that amidst all the added stress, right? And you could talk about, well, why would he be stressed, right, if he knew he wasn't guilty? I don't know, man. Like if that happened to me and this thing got all the way to trial, I'd be like, shit, I
Wrongful
don't know, man.
convictions. Yeah, you throw something to a jury. You have a accuser who takes the stand, which credit to her, the courage it takes to do that, and is pointing to you like that's scary. Like it is not in your hands, even if you did it. So we've had wrongful convictions before. We have our system, and I'm glad we have that system, but it's not 100%. So yeah, no, there's still nerve-wracking elements of that.
Yeah, and then to do what he did through that, right? Like going back to that Big Ten tournament, right? It's like a fever dream. It's like this is the level that he played at. I mean, when you're in it and when you're watching it, you're like, man, there's Terrence again. And then you look back, you're like, I mean, 34 a game, whatever it was, like on the way to that banner. It's wild to think about. And even with the trial, right? I think I texted you after. I was like, hey, obviously happy for him, like as a kid, right? Like being able to move on from that, but his draft stock might have boosted from this.
Yeah.
As crazy as that is to say, you got like 5 or 6 character testimonies that were pretty public based off the tweets that were going out with Tim Anderson, Justin Harmon, like a myriad of other people that like a very public case like this. If I was an NBA team, you get all the intel from the coaches, and I know the Illinois staff's like, hey, this is one of the best kids we've ever been around, right? And that doesn't match what the accusations were. But now that you have a not guilty verdict and you have all the people coming out saying these things about him, it's like, man, this is a guy that we would for sure want in our locker room as an NBA team.
If he did not sue the university and he didn't play, like think about that. Like this, you're right. Like this was the greatest season I've seen of an Illinois basketball player, despite what he was going through. And that postseason run, if they did not run into UConn, and he didn't have a great game attacking Klingon, and there were some issues with the game plan. But that UConn team was historic. If they didn't run into them, Mike, we might be talking about one of the greatest postseason runs by an individual in NCAA tournament history. Like I was starting to look that up as they were going along and got to the Elite Eight. Like you're thinking of Danny Manning and Kemba Walker, and like he was until the Elite Eight on one of those runs. I mean, it was like 28 points a game in the season. Yeah, like you think of like all those games that were kind of fraught in the Big Ten tournament. All those games were fraught, right? They were down in all of them. And then the first round game, like that wasn't a given at one point. And then Terrence just takes over. And obviously Marcus had a big game too, but like that was just an unbelievable run. And, we've talked about it. The Pipers wrote the column, like that jersey belongs in the rafters because it's one of the best careers we've seen, even if it was just 2 years. Like Nick Anderson only played 2 years. Kenny Battle only played 2 years. Terrence Shannon is right up there with those guys, if not even higher, of what he did in 2 years.
Yeah, and the All-American thing in particular, right? Like we talked about this on a pod after those teams came out. Like I don't care what the teams are. That dude was a first-team All-American. Like I he just was, and no matter, like I watched it, we all watched it, we saw it. Like nothing will take that away. But you got a scenario now where, I think given what he's done, right, and being first team All Big Ten on multiple occasions, and being an All-American, albeit not, unanimous or whatever it is, or whatever the criteria is, like he's still, I think, honestly, like I know there was a trial and all that. I thought the way he represented himself and the way he, even when the verdict was reached, right, and verbalized in the courtroom, he wasn't jumping around and jumping into his lawyer's arms and acting like, oh my God, thank God I got, like, it was almost like there was like stoicism to it, where it's like, this is what I believed all along. And now it's like, it's time to get down to business and move on with my life and move on to this NBA chapter.
So what do you think about his NBA potential, both in the draft next Thursday and Friday, and what he could be once he gets to the NBA? Like, where do you think he should go? What do you think would be some good fits? We could talk about that. What do you think about Terrence Shannon's next step?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited for him, first and foremost. When you look at the draft itself, when you look at the order, when you look at where he could be selected, I think he's going to be in that 15 to 25 range. There's a few different teams. I know he worked out for the Bulls, right? Sounded like the Heat, the Knicks, and the Suns were maybe the other ones. So you're talking about 11, 15, 22, and then 24 and 25 with the 2 Knicks picks. Like, I think all those situations make sense. I don't think that the Bulls would jump at 11. Now, I was sitting back and thinking to myself, like, man, who's going to be the Cam Johnson of this draft? Right? Like, who's going to be picked in the lottery and everybody's like, whoa. Could that be Terrence? Maybe. Like, I would love to see him. He just fits great in Miami with, like, Heat culture and the way they play.
You mentioned Miami, and I'm like, that's the perfect fit. They want to win now. Is Jimmy going to get traded? I don't know, but like, he fits what they look for, guys who are ready to play, who are going to be good NBA players. And in this draft, like, Terrence Shannon has one of the rare floors after guys you're talking about in the lottery that, like, I just think that's one of the higher 4 players in this draft.
Well, and they don't care about age. I mean, they just drafted Tommy Hawkins last year, right? They've proven that they don't, they brought Kendrick Nunn in when he was 23, 24 years old. Like, they've shown over the years that doesn't really matter to them. Now, they've gone young with, like, Bam and Tyler Hero, but so Miami makes sense. I think Phoenix makes a lot of sense too, because I'll throw Milwaukee in there as well. I think that's one that I think would be a fit. You can say the same about New York, and I'll bunch all these together. But the way I see him projecting out as a player, right? And I don't know if this is going to be unique from what people have talked about. We've obviously watched him a ton, and I think that there's a lot of talk about how electric he is in transition, his ability to score the basketball, and I just think, like, I think that his, like, elite trait is not either of those things. I don't think he's going to be one of the best scorers in the NBA. But what I do think he can end up being is one of the best defenders in the NBA. Like, I truly believe that. And now you could have people that see that and be like, well, he wasn't even all defense in the Big Ten. This is a totally different situation. And we saw it with Ayo. Ayo had plenty of times where he was hands on his knees, standing in the corner. Like, a lot was asked of both those guys. So now you have a situation. Now I'll just give this particular scenario, right? Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, Brooke Lopez, and now they have a bunch of unrestricted free agents, right? They have Malik Beasley, they have Pat Beverly, they have Jay Crowder. All those guys are unrestricted free agents. But think about Terrence Shannon if you literally just said, hey, we have Dame, we have Giannis. I didn't even mention Giannis. Not Bobby Portis. Get Bobby Portis out of there. We have Giannis. We have guys that can score the basketball. Your job is to be just an absolute hound defensively. You're going to guard the best player on the other team, just like we watched Jaylen Brown do in the finals here. And that is your responsibility. And I'm telling you, man, like, for Terrence Shannon, that is like his defensive upside. And then I trust in his ability to shoot the ball. Like, I don't know how he's going to be as, like, a finisher around the rim in the NBA. Like, it's just different in college basketball. Now you're talking about, like, it's hard for anyone, right? Porzingis is there. Gobert is there. Like, it's just
clinging. Like, everybody's got a clinging, right? Like, basically. So, like, it's just a different level. And being a spot up shooter, I think that'll be interesting to see him do that more. Does that really help him? But the thing about Ayo, and him and Ayo are different people, but they're all wired a little similarly. And that's what I love about Terrence. And I think just based on his basketball is that, he's going to get the most out of him. Right? Like, you're going to get the most out of him. Like, he is going to reach his potential, whatever that potential is. Like, I had no question about that with Ayo. And you're seeing it out, play itself out in the NBA. And I think there's a lot of value to that, especially for teams that are in contention that have these windows that only have these draft picks are really important for them to hit with the cap that they have, with 2 players making most of the money of that cap. They got to find some value pieces here that could really help them for the next 3 or 4 years. And I have no question Terrence Shannon will do that.
Yeah. And he fits in, to me, much better with a contender and with, like, a playoff team, because
than, like, the Wizards at 26. Like, no.
Yes, because there's too much ambiguity there. Like, I think the ecosystem that Terrence Shannon fits the most in, right? And I even go back to when he first got to Illinois, right? There was like him, there was Matthew Meyer, there was like, and there was this kind of ambiguity. I think, people knew he was going to be one of the top guys, but early on, it was kind of like a looking around thing until like the script was clear, man. Like, you're the guy, balls in your hands. And like, when he had that, he could really go.
It was my biggest criticism of him. His first year was like, you are the alpha, dude. Like, do it. Like, and then last year, he obviously realized that.
Yeah. So like he just in watching him, right? Like, he needs structure, right? And when I say structure, like, he needs to have like a set job. And that's really hard to do when you're with the Hornets or the Blazers or with like any of these teams that are just kind of like don't have an identity as a team. So everybody's just kind of running amok and there's just way too much ambiguity there. But again, like with a Suns, with a Bucks, with a Heat, right? Like, he can get a very specific job description. And that's where I think he's the best, where it's like, boom, I'm basically our best defender with my size and my ability to move my feet. That is my job every single night. And then if you want to sag off me, if I'm playing with a guy like Tyler Hero, or I'm playing with a guy like Kevin Durant, or these guys that Devin Booker, these guys that command too, like, I can catch it there. I can either drive a long closeout, or I can make you pay catch and shoot like that. And if he can just go into it and be like, that is my job, that's where Terrence Shannon flourishes in the NBA. Because him going to some like floundering, bottom of the barrel Eastern Conference or Western Conference team, like, I just don't think that suits his development as a player.
Can I throw one more team at you?
Sure.
Because the star of this team could be on another team next year. But the Lakers, he's a clutch client. LeBron, Anthony Davis. What would you think of that fit?
I mean, I had to have some conversations with JJ Redick, right?
Your boy.
No, like, again, like that's another really good fit, because something that team, he can coexist with an Austin Reeves. He can coexist with like a Anthony Davis for sure. Like that honestly, like, if I'm the Lakers, I'm like, hold on. We got Terrence Shannon at like the point of attack, potentially defensively in some lineups. And then we got AD on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's pretty high level. Cause we watched last year, like with Jameer Young, and when Terrence like really dialed it up defensively. Cause again, like the difference with Io and with Terrence, like I put them into the same bucket because so much responsibility offensively in college. And then you saw the strides that Io made defensively. Because both those guys, in particularly Terrence, because he's got, probably 2 inches, 3 inches on Io and some mass on Io, is like, once you get Terrence Shannon defending for survival, that's like what makes me light up, because I truly think like he can be that type of impact guy on that end in the NBA.
Yeah. All right, let's go zoom out here. We're going to get away from Illinois for a little bit. NBA draft is Thursday and Friday. They split it up. First round Thursday. Friday afternoon, I believe, is the second round of the draft. So hopefully we hear Terrence's name on Thursday evening, Mike. But this is an interesting draft, because it does feel like there's some players who are going to be good role players, maybe some rolls of the dice that can you find your Giannis like they did in 2013, which was an awful draft. But who do you like in this draft? Like, as we're looking at some of these prospects, and some of the top guys are from Europe, Alex Sarr and Zach Sasher, but then you're looking at Reed Shepherd, Nikola Topic, Matas Buzelis, Stefan Castle, who I was really impressed with by UConn, Donovan Kling and Dalton Connect, Ron Holland, Rob Dillingham. Those are some of the top guys in this draft. Is there anybody you really like in this kind of mix of guys who go anywhere in the lottery?
Is there anybody that I really like? Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously been a lot of talk, and I'm not just saying this because I was like a shorter white shooter, but I really think like this stuff's going to translate with Reed Shepherd. Like when you look at the top 10, right? I see 3, maybe 4 guys that like I think have an elite trait, right? I think Reed Shepherd does. Right, with his ability to shoot the basketball. I think Steph Castle does. I think with his ability to defend. And then I think Devin Carter does as well. Like I think Devin Carter is like an elite rebounder as a guard. Now it all depends, right? Like, is that worth a top 10 pick? If you're like, man, this elite rebounding guard, let's go get him. Like, now Devin Carter offers some other things, but like I really like Jared McCain too. I like him more in like the back part of the lottery. Like if the Bulls ended up taking Jared McCain, I don't think that's like crazy. I'll tell you I'll start at the top, right? Like with Atlanta, because I think one guy I didn't mention, I'm saving him for a reason, is I went back, I watched Sarr, I watched Risa Shea. I just look like it's not about who goes number one, it's who's drafting number one. So it's the Atlanta Hawks, and I look at Quinn Snyder and I look at Trae Young, right? Or DeJounte Murray, right? I mean, if they end up parting ways with one of those two, if I'm Quinn Snyder and Trae Young, like why, or even if you're Landry Fields making the selection, why are you drafting a project? What's the point of that? Like you are like the Hawks expectations should be playoffs next year. Like it should be. They underperformed this year. I know Snyder came in kind of,
especially in a draft where the projects you don't think are superstar level projects, right? Like
yeah.
This is more like, hey, this guy could be a starter, good starter.
Yeah, like I watched Sarr. Like Sarr is a good player. Sarr is going to be a good player for somebody. Like he's kind of like Al Horford-ish, right? Like not the best athlete, but just kind of knows where to be. You know, Perth had him in like the dunker spot and had him in the short corner. And, he got his work off of like cuts to the basket, offensive rebounds. His mechanics on his shot like aren't broke. Al Horford didn't start shooting threes till 8 years into the league. So there's definitely value in him, but I don't think Sarr possesses any type of elite trait. I mean, if you want to say like his tools and what he can be and project out to be defensively on the perimeter as like a switchable defensive player, then yeah, sure. But Risa Shea is the same way, where like he can shoot it. You know, he was 40-ish% catch and shoot for out in France this year. And but I don't think he necessarily possesses like a super elite trait either. So if I'm looking at that and I say, all right, I'm Atlanta, let me get a guy that has an elite trait that, can actually help us if we go to the playoffs or we want to contend to the playoffs. It's Donovan Clingan. Like to me, like that would be my pick, my first pick. And that may sound like crazy to some people. I don't know. But like he is the guy that I think has that elite trait where people are like, well, yeah, he's Rudy Gobert. And I'm like, okay, he's a 4-time defensive player of the year.
If you told me
what he is in the playoffs, like, oh, well, he'll get played off the floor in the playoffs. It's like he's still in an 82-game regular season. Those guys are really good regular season guys. And the regular season determines whether or not you get into the freaking playoffs or not. So
if you told me he's Rudy Gobert, that's worth a number one pick in this draft.
Yeah. I mean, Rudy Gobert, I think also in that 2013 draft. I think with like Steven Adams and some of those other guys, like you just you're not going to have that like top end, perennial all-star at the top of this draft. Like I just don't see that. So with Clingan, it's like, I think you have a high floor. I think, you're not going to ask much of him. Whereas like Sarr, I just don't know like what his identity would be as a player coming in. And like, if you're the Hawks, like, I'm not sure you really have time for that. So to me, like I would have Clingan one. I really would. And we'll see if like the Hawks decide to zag like that, which at this point, like, I'm not sure that's like that crazy of a zag.
Yeah. Any of these other guys you got like big thoughts on, like Buzelis, who's from Chicagoland? I'm a big fan of Dalton Connect, but I think he's a role player, right? Like, yeah.
I mean, I'm like,
interesting.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm looking at my mock right now. I'm 17 picks into my mock. So it's fine that we're talking about the top part of it. Cause right now, like I have Clingan 1, I have Risa Shea 2 to the Wizards, Shepherd 3 to the Rockets, Steph Castle 4 to the Spurs, which like Risa Shea could go 4, like San Antonio could trade up if that's who they want. But I have Connect going 5 to the Pistons. Cause I think if you're the Pistons, just fired your coach today, and you're going to have cap space. I think with this draft pick, you've done enough of like the young Jalen Duren, like Cade Cunningham's, like go and get like a semi-adult, go get Dalton Connect. Like, I just think I think he's ready to make an impact. He's not going to be like your star by any means, but Dalton Connect has a ceiling of like a 18, 19 a game guy in the NBA. Like I firmly believe that. It could happen sooner than later if he's on a bad team. But yeah, I mean, I like Connect a lot. You know, the other guy that I think.
Keep going with your mock. I kind of want to hear the rest of your mock.
Yeah. So I mean, I have Connect going 5 to Detroit. I have Sarr down at 6, and maybe that'll come back as like egg on my face. But I just think for him, right, he goes to Charlotte, like he's gonna have a little more opportunity to kind of fly around and figure out who he is. I got Tishdane Saloon going 8 to the Spurs as well. I know they already have Wemby, but like you can play those two together with like his motor and the way he plays. Devin Carter going 9 to Memphis. Go ahead.
By the way, I like where San Antonio probably likes where it's sitting. That they don't have number 1, and the guy at number 4 could be as good as number 1 with less of the pressure. And then number 8, you could get like a guy who slides a little bit, should have gone top 5. Like
yeah, I mean this draft. Yeah, in this draft, 8 could be as good as 1. Yeah. I mean, having 2 picks in this first round, getting 2 cracks at it, or first top 10 is there's a lot of value in that. So yeah, and Buzelis, like, look, I watch both Ignite guys. I watch Ron Holland. I watch Buzelis. Like, I just think Buzelis just adds a lot more value, right? Like, he's a better, whether he's on the ball or off the ball, like he's a good cutter. He's a good offensive rebounder. He blocks shots. Like, you can move him around in a lot of different spots. Whereas I just think Ron Holland, like the best version of Ron Holland you're going to get is with the ball in his hands. And I don't even think that version is that great. Yeah. So that's what's tough when I watch Holland. I have Holland going 14 to the Blazers. Cause again, like similar to Sarr with the Hornets, like Holland's just gonna have to go somewhere where he just kind of flies around.
All right. So give me to the Bulls. I need some hope here, Mike, because you really don't have much, and I'm not expecting a ton out of this draft pick. But I'm just of the mind, like Ron Holland, I think has a really low floor, as you're talking about. But the Bulls got to get somebody with some kind of ceiling here. Like I know it's not the draft that you're star hunting, but when you have such limited assets, it feels like the Bulls need to take a big swing here.
Holland wouldn't be the swing I take. For sure. But look, I think,
or maybe they should just get a solid basketball player. I don't know.
If Cody Williams slides to 11, I think you could go with Cody Williams. The guy I have slotted in that spot, and you can thank Isaac Trotter for this because he kind of talked me into it. Because I'm like, I've been down on this guy since January, and I said, just wait. The measurements are going to come out. He's going to have a short wingspan. It's going to affect his draft stock. He's going to slide. Rob Dillingham. So like, you look at Caruso and Io and Kobe White. I was going to look at stuff. Kobe White probably is the best, next to maybe Caruso, probably is the best contract in the NBA.
I'll give the Bulls this. Their offseason last year of signing him and Io and Kobe, those contracts are unbelievable. Like, those look great. It's the Vucevic, the Levine deals that obviously we have issues with.
Yeah. So like I have Dillingham at 11 to Chicago, begrudgingly. Like, I think I initially had him 16 to Philadelphia. And then as I was just kind of looking at him, I'm like, all right, whatever, just throw him in at 11. Like, those guys that have short wingspans, it's really hard for them. And he's thin, man. Like, he's thin and has a short wingspan. Like, Allen Iverson was thin, but Allen Iverson had like a 6'6" wingspan at 5'11". It makes a big difference. So I had him there. Our boy, I had Zach Edey, 12 to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, I just think if you're Presti, and he usually goes for like the long length, like Cody Williams archetype, but
and what do they need?
They need to bolster their front court. There were just too many times in the playoffs where they had Chet in there at the 5 and just got obliterated on the glass. So maybe they address that in free agency, or maybe they do it in the draft. But I think Edey's worth a look in the lottery. McCain, I have 13 to Sacramento, and I have Ron Holland 14 to Portland. So that's my lottery. And you didn't ask me about Edey, but I'll talk about Edey.
Yes, go for it. I was about to ask you about the Big Ten guys, so it's perfect.
Yeah. So I've had a lot of pushback just in talking about Edey. And I think this is like a broader point to make about big men in the NBA, right? I think there's a misnomer that this shift in the NBA to outside shooting and three-point shooting and how the floor has been kind of inverted. I think there's been a misnomer with what that means for bigs. Because if you're a guard or a wing, and you cannot shoot the ball and you're a zero, that's when it becomes really difficult. There are plenty of instances of non-shooting 5 men in the NBA. They're all over the place. We saw 2 of them in the finals for Dallas with Lively and with Gafford. And I think when you talk about Klingon and when you talk about Edey, those are 2 separate conversations, right? And I dropped them into 2 different buckets because there's 2 different buckets of non-shooting bigs in the NBA. The one bucket is non-shooting big but elite rim protector. Okay, so that would be Gobert, that's Walker Kessler, that's Nick Claxton, that's Clint Capella, Okongwu. It's like that archetype of guy. And then you have the non-shooters that are not elite rim protectors. Like there are those guys in the NBA, right? There's Zubats, right? There's Mason Plumlee. Okay. Like there's Boban Marjanovic. Like there's so many of these guys that because they're skilled in other areas and because like they at least can think the game and are smart enough, like they can survive in the NBA and they have a motor, just like I think Zach Edey does as well. And he'll play hard. So this thought of like, hey, he doesn't have a jump shot, so he doesn't belong in the NBA. Like there's plenty of evidence that suggests that's just not the case, and that he'll be fine if he does the other things, right? Like when we do the, referendum on the Edey career in 5 years, whether he's in the NBA or not in the NBA, like to me, it's not going to be because he didn't develop a jump shot. It's going to be the defense, right? Like if he can't guard ball screens at a relatively high level, and if he ends up getting hunted and not holding up on that end, then I think he might be out of the league in not in the first couple of years, but in a few years. Now, if he develops a jump shot, that just extends his shelf life, right? Like Myers Leonard, Brook Lopez, Horford did the same thing. Like all those guys start shooting later in their career. So it's not like a one size fits all for some of these bigs. And that's why I think you look at, when you're drafting, it's like, hey, okay, we get a guy who was a National Player of the Year 2-time that is an over 70% free throw shooter. Like I would expect Edey to have much more of a chance of developing an outside shot than Klingon. Klingon's a high 50s free throw shooter. There's a lot of like movement shoulder down with him. And Edey is just like right here. It's kind of like, statuesque, but that's fine. That's all it needs to be for him. So we'll see, man. We'll see if it how he progresses in that way. But like, there's a number of teams as you walk through with like Oklahoma City or even Memphis at 9 if they want to take Edey. Toronto makes sense at 19. He can kind of go home. A lot of different landing spots from New Orleans. But he's a first-round pick, and I don't know why people were arguing with me during the season acting like he wasn't.
Yeah, I would imagine Khalil Ware is a first-round pick because of that versatile skill set of being a rim protector and a guy who's capable of shooting it a little bit from beyond the arc. And then a guy I know we both like, young, just like his brother when he came out, but Cam Christie has been mocked by some in the first round, but definitely in that first 45 picks where he'll get a guaranteed contract. So what do you think of those two guys heading into the draft?
I wouldn't be surprised at all if Cam Christie makes it into the first round, right? That wouldn't shock me if fall off like a Denver or like a Celtics or any of those teams. I know the Wizards have a pick late as well. Like any of those teams taking a flyer on him, that wouldn't shock me. Minnesota, Khalil Ware is I think a little bit interesting because I'm probably even higher on Edey than I am on Ware. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but like I just think with Khalil Ware, right, like he's going to need to be a rim protector, like a rim protector in that first bucket that I mentioned, right? Like the Capella, the Okongwu, like that type of guy. And the difference between protecting the rim in college basketball and protecting the rim in the NBA is, in college basketball, if you're Donovan Klingon or if you're any of these guys, like I can park myself under the basket and there's no reason for me to move at all. I don't have to leave. All I have to do is just wait. Guys come to me, swat. Easier job than in the NBA. You're playing. There's a second game that you're playing, which is getting in and out of the lane for the defensive 3 seconds. So when you look at like what makes Klingon, I think really good, what makes Gobert good, what makes like Derek Lively really good, these guys that can protect the rim, is if you're skilled enough offensively and if you can think the game enough, that aids you on the defensive end because Now it's like, all right, they're in this action. I got to get out of the lane, but I got to get back in the lane because this is the end of the action. They're going to get downhill at some point here. And if you can think that, that's what makes you a really good NBA rim protector. And like, I don't know if like I haven't seen enough of that from Khalil Ware off the ball to be able to like anticipate, get back in, go from guarding a perimeter guy to going back into the paint and tracking the ball down, or like, because that's going to be the step that he has to take. And I think people were, I don't want to say like lauding his motor this year. I just think, you know, it was relative to what it was at Oregon, which was zilch. So he still, I think, needs to grow in that area. But I think he'll end up in that, like, you know, 17 to, and think about him backing up AD, right, with the Lakers, or, you know, going to Orlando if they decide to, you know, not pick up Mo Wagner's option, like all that stuff I think is possible. So I like both of them. I think they'll both be first round picks. If Christie isn't, I think he'll be really, really early second round. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that I think you'll see definitely in the second round too, that I think could end up being valuable pieces from the Big Ten.
It'd be great for Illinois if they can have their first round draft pick since Myers Leonard in 2012. So we'll find that out next Thursday. Terrence Shannon waits to hear his name called. Mike LaTulip, anything else in that draft notebook you got that you want to get out?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's certainly guys, I was joking with Trotter about this, where, you know, certain guys that I think project well and certain guys I think don't project well. And I have two guys, like, and I'm just going on record and saying it, like, that I don't think project as well, like relative to where they may be drafted. I already talked about Dillingham, and Johnny Furphy is the other guy from Kansas, right? Like, there's just something there that I just don't see translating. Like, he has the ability to shoot it, but I don't see like a ton of foot speed, like the athleticism. Like, it's gonna be really hard for him. Where like I look at a Duncan Robinson, and there's just like a certain dexterity with the way that he shoots that allowed him to survive. So I joked with Trotter. I was like, hey, I'm not taking my victory lap, but I'm like at the starting line in the sprinter blocks, ready to, I may already be doing a light jog with Furphy, but Dillingham, I'm like in the starters blocks, ready to run. And I say that as I mocked him to Chicago. So I'm sure Bulls fans are probably pretty fired up about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That would make it make too much sense. But Michael, too, speaking of Trotter, he is in. We're going to do a Big Ten preview after the 4th of July, after I get a vacation in and we get some time to think about these rosters that are finally set. So looking forward to really breaking down what is a wide open conference, man.
Well, we did. I mean, I went through and did my like preseason rankings, and I was like, geez, it's hard to fathom a team finishing 18th in a conference, right? Like, it's wild. Are they doing the conference tournament top 15 next year?
I have to figure that out. I haven't even thought that far ahead, Mike. The new reality of what this is all going to be.
Because that could actually be, that like brings some intrigue, right? Because like the teams that would usually, you know, kind of play spoiler, you know, at the end of a season where you're playing a team that's like 16th in the conference standings, you're like, oh, whatever. Like, they don't really, like, those teams kind of have something to play for now, like getting into the conference tournament.
It's like the 11 seed was always dangerous in this Big Ten tournament. There's always one team that played on Wednesday that felt like it was super dangerous. So
yeah, so we'll see what happens. But I'm excited. Like, we could just do an hour long of like unleashing Trotter and I's texts in the last like month and a half, but that wouldn't be a good podcast. So I'm excited to hop on with him and just talk through. I think he has some opinions that I disagree with, and I think I have some opinions he disagrees with. So this won't turn into like a first take, but no, it'll be fun, man. And where are you going on vacation?
Fort Myers Beach.
It's back.
Yeah, it is. This is the first time I've been back. My family has a family friend that has a condo there, and we haven't been there since before the hurricane. So looking forward to getting back. And if you haven't been to Fort Myers Beach, man, it is awesome because there's a little bit of commercial, but it just feels different than a lot of the really commercialized beaches. So I'm really looking forward to getting out.
We went there. My wife and I, we were like 2 months into dating, and we went down to Fort Myers together. Wow.
That's a
yeah. We went down to Fort Myers. We got engaged after 6 months, but so it was like a natural step. But we went down to Fort Myers, and I want to say we stayed at the Lani Kai.
Yes, that's the college.
Yeah.
Right there.
But it wasn't the actual Lani Kai. There's like a smaller Lani Kai across the street, a
Yeah.
little more subdued.
Yes.
But to get to the beach, you had to walk through the Lani Kai. And yeah, it was like South
Party central.
Padre type situation there. But it was neat, man. Like you walk down and it's got like,
Times
you walk down the street, bunch of little, like a square with some ice cream shops and restaurants and stuff. Like it's neat. I know it got kind of ripped up over, whenever that was, 2021 or 2.
Yes. But yeah, like we're a little farther down on the beach, so it gets a little quieter, but you're really close to being able to do all that stuff. And I suggest anybody, if you haven't been down there, it's just it's gorgeous. So
come for the basketball talk, stay for the Fort Myers Beach
right promotional
pitch.
Yeah, here we go. Mike LaTulip, you are the goods. Appreciate the insight as always. We'll catch up for our Big Ten preview show here coming up in a couple weeks.
Sounds good, man. Looking forward to it.
All right, everybody, thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell as well. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.